All right, hello. I'm going to assume that's all working and you haven't all disappeared into the ether. So thanks very much for your patience and sticking with these very intense sessions. So yeah, today I'm talking about pirates, pub quizzes, and park life. And Joe asked me to talk about how to study group processes with games. And when she first asked me, I really didn't understand what she was talking about and then I realized looking at these other talks that, like several of these speakers, I began as a developmental psychologist. And if you do that, you know that you have to make an experiment that's fun and engaging, or your participant bursts into tears and screams at you. So I've always had that mindset that an experiment is something that has to engage the person doing it. And I think often what we do with experiments is we think of them as a task given to an employee, and it's their job just to go through it. But from the participant's perspective, it's always something like a game. They want to win. They are worried about whether or not they seem good. They want to strategize. So I think always thinking about every experiment as a type of game is a much more useful and valid way to approach it. But I might return to some people who disagree with that perspective right at the end. Let me tell you about what we've been doing using games for group processes. So what I look at in my lab very broadly is collective experience or social context. So what is the value of being around other people in the way that we haven't for a long, long year? What does that do to us emotionally? How do we coordinate our behavior? How do we coordinate our physiology? We look at heartbeats with people watching musicals. And how does it change our social affiliation? How are we connected to these other people? And how might that change our decision making? Most decisions that we make when we use our language or decision-making processes, it's with other people. Yet mostly when we study them, it's in a tiny laboratory cubicle that excludes other people. So I got interested in these sort of effects of social context and ways that we could study them. And with my graduate student at the time, Una von Zimmerman, the Wellcome Trust helped us develop this tool, which actually Cauldron developed. I think they did this before they did Gorilla. It's a system we call the Hive, where you have your little device in front of you and you sign in. And then you get a dot on your device and you move that dot. And at the front of the room, there's a big screen with your dot on it. And if you do this in an auditorium, there's your dot and there's a dot of 50 other people. And this means we can ask people questions and they can respond as individuals, and they can look up and see what the group is doing. And we can look at that group dynamic, at that interplay between what I think and what I think in front of other people and how I coordinate with them. So we've used it in various different ways. This is just a little experiment looking at the wisdom of the crowds, where we get people to say, how much does this creature weigh? That's a liger. And they drag their little dots to give their answer. The star there is the average answer. Right now, they can't see each other's responses. I've drawn them back in. And what you find, just as Galton observed a long time ago, is you get a distribution of answers, but the average of those answers is really hauntingly correct. He called it the wisdom of the crowds. And we showed that if people can see each other's dots, if you turn those on so they give their responses knowing what other people think, what happens is that wisdom of the crowd filters away. People can see what other people think, and they move to be close together, and gradually they drag themselves farther and farther away from the true answer. So we can give people these little sort of quizzes, and we can look at that group dynamic of how people change their response, seeing what other people believe. And what we are particularly interested in my lab is not just how are we affected by other people, but how am I affected by my people? And of course, we know from social psychology, there are multiple layers of these social identities that we connect to other people like the same music or fashion or support the same football club. And we're all, as individuals, a mixture of all these social identities. And we've been using these games to try and pick these things apart. And together with my colleagues, this is their work actually, they found that many of the behaviors that we think of as purely automatic are actually structured by social identities. So, the textbook thing is that yawning is a contagious automatic thing. But they showed if they showed their students these pictures, but said these are also students from the University of St. Andrews, or these are students from the University of Glasgow up the road. If they're my people, I'm more likely to have that yawn be contagious. I'm more likely to start yawning if those are my people. So we've been trying to pick this apart and quantify it. And again, we give these people these little choices where they drag the dot to one of these paintings here, and we tell them that you're either red or that you're blue. So it's a minimal group paradigm to put people in a group with other people who have the same artistic preferences as themselves. And then they drag their dots around. We say, just move to a green blob. We give them these arbitrary decisions. And of course, they start copying each other. They move as a red team or they move as a blue team. Even though that's a free choice, they tend to be nudged and to cluster along with people in their social group. And so what I've just shown you, that's a real experiment done at the Science Museum. We spent the past 6 months putting all that infrastructure of the hive, which was designed for a room with a large screen, putting that online. So now people can play the same sort of games, but virtually online. We can use them for real group interactions, and I'll show you some in a minute, or we can sort of cheat a little bit and make people think they're having a real group interaction, but in fact, they're watching pre-recorded slides. So what I'm about to show you is all done with video. And this is a video of me. That's me on the right. That's also me there. You can see 3 Daniels. That's too many Daniels. But I'm imagining being a participant in this study where we trick people into thinking they're engaged in a video interaction. So it sort of looks like this. So we have deliberately made the videos a bit glitchy because, as we've seen, Zoom is always glitchy.
12. Okay, great. We're all here. Okay.
So this is all pre-recorded. So these are all pre-recorded videos of me, but I'm being the experimenter talking to them, and they think they're one person surrounded by other people. So all those people are pre-recorded videos, apart from that little thumbnail of me that's a live view of me watching it, listening to me, the experimenter. This is more confusing than I had in mind. But you do little bits of interaction to trick people like this.
Okay, so let me just check everything is working. If you can see and hear me, could you give me a wave or a thumbs up? Okay, great. If you can see yourself and you can see everyone else, can you give me a wave and a thumbs up? Perfect. All right, it's working.
So you just have a little bit of contingency built in. You set the expectation, say, I'm turning off your microphone so it's not weird that no one's talking. And you can pretty much convince people, about 70% of people thought, yeah, this is some sort of weird Zoom hybrid game I'm playing with other people. And then you can look at the social effects of who are those people. So here we just put them in red or blue teams, and then they had a pub quiz together. So we asked them questions like this, and you can play along.
Now return to the hive again, get into the middle. What is the population of chickens in the world? How many chickens are there? The correct answer, surprisingly, is almost 24 billion.
So there you go. And of course, we can just quantify the degree to which people gave their answer going along with their people. And we introduced little things like that buffering screen when we weren't really buffering, but every video thing does buffer. So we put in some sort of fake tech failures to make it more plausible. So as I say, that was a pre-recorded video, but you can also have real interactions between people because we've taken all of that hive infrastructure and put it into Gorilla. So people can join from Prolific and they just get thrown in a room with 6 other people also from the Prolific pool. And we were engaged in an experiment with the Science Gallery Bengaluru, having a exhibit about the history and art, lots of things around the idea of contagion. So they came to talk to us and we did the contagion of behavior and how it spreads. And we ran over 300 people from India and across the world. Engaged in this particular thing. It was very difficult because, of course, the pandemic hit India even farther. Then cyclones hit India. It was a very challenging thing, but we got an enormous number of data, which was a lot of fun to collect. And we set this up, and our question here was, okay, we know there's an effect of being on the red or the blue team, but is that a gradual dial? Is there a gradual effect of being more or less close to these people? So we varied levels of social identity. I'll tell you how in a second. And then we asked them to make various decisions, and they played various games like this Park Life game, which I'll end on telling you in about 5 minutes. So how do we turn the dial on this level of perceptual identity? Well, they're playing this game of pirates. We had a whole narrative of me doing a pirate voice, which I'm not doing for you right now. And we asked them things like, okay, here's the ballerina who washed ashore, and what direction is she rotating with? And we suggested that the rotation you see tells us something about your personality. We said some people think this. Actually, it doesn't at all in terms of the science of it, but we suggested that maybe this gives us an indication into your personality. And people gave their responses. I see that rotation or that rotation. And then we told them what the other people playing thought. But this was faked information. This was fake feedback. And of course, we debriefed all of this afterwards. So in one case, we said, okay, you saw anti-clockwise rotation, and all the other people who saw that, they're all blue. Or on the other hand, we said, well, all but one were blue, and then there's one red. And we could gradually turn the dial down on how many people on your team saw the same rotations you, therefore are like you. So we vary this level of group cohesion. And then we played various games. We looked at how that social influence spread. So in one case, we said, oh, your ship is sinking. Do you want to stay on the ship and risk it, or do you want to flee to an island? And we had dots moving in particular ways, seeing if people followed their team, and if that depended on who they thought was in that team. And what we found, this is brand new data, that as we gradually increase that group level, we increase the probability that people followed their teammates. There was a more or less linear increase as I felt more and more of these other blue dots. Yeah, they're like me. They see the same rotation. So we had it on a series of decision-making tasks, and we also got them to play this game, Park Life. So what is Park Life? This is a whole project, and I'm just showing you the last window of it. On Park Life, it's like one of these sort of farm simulators, these little games where you tap a button, you grow resources, and then you sort of grow something. And in this game, what you grow is a park. It used to be a park in London, but we changed it so that it's a park on a desert island in this case. And the idea is that you tap, 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 and every time you tap as a team, it grows a park feature. What we did in this game, though, was introduce an inequality. So the red team have to tap more than the blue team because they found less treasure in some previous game. So the two teams are playing this games, but the red team are disadvantaged. And what we're interested in is whether that unfairness, that disadvantage, that resentment they might feel would translate into antisocial behavior. So you could tap, tap, tap to grow your park, or you could flick a switch and tap, and then you start to vandalize the other side's park. And that's what we're interested in, how that level of inequality translates into antisocial behavior. There's a whole background from the London riots that inform this. So there they are tapping away. And indeed, we found that as your degree of connection with the people around you increased, then the degree to which you took that inequality as a negative and turned that into antisocial action increased. So people are very sensitive, not just to this is my team, but these are people who I'm connected with, and that changed their response to social inequality. It changed the way that they approach the whole game. So there's many other things about that project, but I just want to end so we don't overrun a little early. And I just want to end just with a few comments, because I think many of us might agree with the overall idea, since you're here on a session about gamifying research, but you will run into resistance. And I'm in the middle of a huge argument with a reviewer at the moment who basically saw these Park Life games and said, well, that's just a game, right? We're interested in riots and antisocial behavior. But he said, well, your little game, that's nothing like a real riot where people could be imprisoned, or they could be physically damaged. They might go to prison. There's nothing like a real riot. And we've involved this big argument, which I think you will find if ever you do gamified research, we say, well, it's not supposed to be a simulation of a riot. That's not what a game is. We're not trying to get every single aspect of this phenomena and replicate it like it's in virtual reality in a lab. A game is just some elements of that psychological mechanism, that connection between frustration and antisocial behavior. We're just trying to capture that in a small game. So you shouldn't hold us to the criteria of being an unrealistic simulation. That's misunderstanding what a game is. And it's misunderstanding what an experiment is, really. I mean, we've learned enormous amounts from the prisoner dilemma experiments, but no one's actually gone to jail after a prisoner's dilemma, right? It's all a hypothetical little interaction. So games are not simulations, and that's a really important point that if you ever do this research, one reviewer will throw back at you. And in the other degree, as I was saying at the start, well, all experiments are a form of play and a form of interaction. So I don't think there's anything unusual about gamified research and non-gamified research. It's all games that people will engage with. And thirdly, this literally just occurred to me this morning is, well, games are important. Why? Because that's how we learn, right? I mean, that's how kids learn. They play fight, they play house, they pretend things. That's how a team will change. They will play and they will do drills. And this whole idea of a simulation of a real phenomena as being a way to learn about it, that's a human characteristic, might be a mammalian characteristic. I don't know enough about it, but it certainly isn't a natural thing. All the time, play is how we learn and how we develop. So rather than being an unusual thing, an experiment that's like a game is getting right at the heart of how we adapt and how we change our behavior. Anyway, I'm going to end there just so we have time for a discussion. Thank you very much for your patience and your time. I have too many collaborators to thank, but there they are.